Nathan, welcome to the Jake Woodhouse Podcast. Thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you, Jake. Very excited to be here to sit down and chat with you, catch up on everything that you've been up to in the interim, hear about the family a little bit as well, too. I am excited and ready to go, my friend.
Thank you so much for joining, and I couldn't agree more. So it's one of the reasons I started this thing. I thought, I've got to get Nathan on. He was awesome when we did our Bitcoin Mentor episode. So I tend to start in the same place, Nathan. So there'll be people out there that won't have come across you before. Just give us a very high-level update as to what you are focused on mostly at the moment.
Awesome. Well, I couldn't be more happy that you asked as well, too, because I'm actually in the final days as we're recording this of my previous Fiat job. And so for me now, I'm going into Bitcoin full time and adding as much value as I can in the way that I can, which is funny because it was a dream for the longest time that I want to spend more time in this space. I want to continue and pursue something in this space, but I couldn't find, my little place. I'm not a developer. I'm not, the most technical. I can't dive deep into the code. I can skim over things, but I couldn't well, maybe I could one day, but I couldn't possibly see myself in almost like an engineering role. So it's like, what do I do? How can I contribute to it? And with Bitcoin Mentor, it's just been the most serendipitous opportunity for me to just help educate the next wave of people they're coming into the space. And so for the past, it's almost coming up on a year, actually getting a little bit closer to that. So Bitcoin Mentor would have launched April 20th at the halving. And I was working with the company a little bit beforehand, getting that stuff set up. So somewhere in and around March. And so I'm continuing to do that and take on more of a kind of administrative and kind of broader company goals role, as well as continuing to do sessions. And starting this February as well, too, I'm going to be making some content and appearing more on the BTC Sessions YouTube channel.
Awesome. I'm intrigued. Having worked with you on Bitcoin Mentor last year. So let's dive into that content side of things. I love that idea of one's dream. When you think about, I don't see myself as an engineer, but did you ever see yourself as a content creator?
Oh God, no.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Yeah, it was funny. I often bug my wife about this, and I'm curious if Ben will ever see it, but I knew that I wanted to be more involved in the space and I wanted to participate. And I have a very kind of realistic but optimistic mindset. I often joke with her that I have a horseshoe up my ass, but really what it is kind of like purpose and direction, and I'll make things happen. Even if I don't know how things are necessarily going to happen, I'll try and make them happen. And so with regards to the content, we happened to be in the same city, but I was not actually aware of it. I only met Ben, Mr. BTC Sessions himself, for the first time a year ago this last Christmas. So we're talking 13 or so months now at the Sats market that he was hosting here in Calgary. Because as soon as the first Sat market popped up, I had to go. I had to participate. I wanted to meet all the Bitcoiners, the businesses, the works. And as we were leaving, I made a brief introduction. And then as we were leaving, I turned to my wife and said, we're going to be friends. I want to make it happen. I don't know how, but we're going to be friends. And now a year later, it's been just a pleasure working with him on the Bitcoin Mentor side of things. And he was looking to expand the channel content. And just again, it looks like serendipity and luck, but part of it too is just, if I'm being honest, it's a hunger to try and solve other people's problems. If you're just useful to people and you can help them out with some stuff, they'll give you more things to work on. And so I just tried to be useful in Bitcoin Mentor and useful to Ben and his other projects and stuff as well too. And I got presented with this opportunity that hey, he's looking for a little more content on the channel. So if you remember the good old actor Gary Mahmood, the wonderful mentor there as well too.
Yes.
Him and I are going to be co-hosting our own show. We're going to get that up and running and put that out as well too. And then additionally, I'm going to be doing tutorial content as well. Because it's funny, I've heard Ben say the story several times, but when he was first starting out, everyone was kind of giving him a hard time in the sense of aren't you gonna run out of Bitcoin content to talk about, Bitcoin tutorials to do? I've seen his list; it's massive, and so I'm gonna help him knock off some of that tutorial content and get that educational material out to everybody.
Awesome, that's absolutely epic. And so when I think of Ben and BTC Sessions, obviously his tutorial is excellent. His tutorial work, and I'm on Telegram groups and stuff for more niche Bitcoin communities here in Australia, and more often than not, when someone's trying to explain something to someone, it's a BTC Sessions.
Yeah, just drop the tutorial. Here you go.
Ben I don't think he really realizes how impactful it's been for so many people all over the world.
100%.
So I think of his tutorials and also his Why Are We Bullish show. So how are you and Gary going to fit into that? So will BTC Sessions as a YouTube channel. Like it won't be just Ben, obviously, any longer. It'll
Yep.
be more of like a broadcast network type thing with different types of shows. Is that right? Is that what you're hoping to build?
That's exactly it. And of course, we're going to test the waters. We're going to take that feedback from the audience, see what really appeals to people, see what's useful and see what's valuable. But I can give you the jumping off point is really trying to continue the brand and continue the mission of what it's doing. And he is the go-to Bitcoin educational content. And so the question that we had to ask is, what else can we possibly serve that Bitcoiners need? What's the value proposition of how we're going to offer something that they might be interested in? And we'll see. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. We'll pivot. Maybe it's a dead show. Maybe it's a great show. I'm just very excited to start explore and to try. But Ben's got Why Are We Bullish? Lots of excitement, news and updates, things that are going on there. He's got Simply Sessions with Nico, which is your Bitcoin news, your one place to stop, get the latest updates, what's important in the space. And we've got the tutorial content, which is the bread and butter, right? That is the big value add. That's the thing that we all valued, that I know I learned from, I think you learned from. Like we've all gone through Ben's tutorials to get to where we are now. And so what Gary and I are going to try and do is, okay, we want to continue serving educational content to Bitcoiners, right? That's the channel, that's the goal. And so the question we asked ourselves is, what's missing? What else can we add? And what we're going to try to offer, and hopefully there's some insight, and I'm hoping that we can build some bridges with other communities and stuff as well too, is we're going to try and have the BTC Sessions educational show for everything else besides Bitcoin. Right? What other skill sets, areas of knowledge are Bitcoiners interested in? Or again, like in the last year, look at how far we've come, right? It's been incredible. But the one thing I just want to kind of like hone in on for a second is that we're kind of getting that seat at the table. And it's time for Bitcoiners to really step up across the globe to be the leaders of the years to come, right? We all see the problems in the current economic and political system where the generation that's kind of aging into these roles. And so we're going to have to be global leaders. And so if we're going to be global leaders, we're going to have more skill sets than just knowing how to set up a wicked multi-sig wallet. What else should we be aware of? What else should we be paying attention to? It could be relationships. It could be health. It could be other aspects of computing. And so what we're going to try and offer is other educational content of value to Bitcoiners while they assume this new role as the leaders in their communities and kind of try to cover all the bases from a Bitcoiner's perspective and angle, right? The stuff that is important to us. An easy, obvious example is just how many of us have improved our health as a result of being here. Because we got tied into better information on nutrition and exercise and expectations for this as well too. There are still going to be some newcomers, people that are just coming into the channel, right? People that are just showing up that need the early tutorial content. And maybe they haven't realized that the information they got on their diet was wrong. And so maybe we can introduce them to some of these great, Dr. Sean Baker, we got Dr. Barry, you got Matthew Lazak with the Fiat food. Like there's such a wealth of information in Bitcoin beyond just Bitcoin. And we want to try and offer and capture some of that.
Brilliant. And I mean, again, to the audience that don't know Nathan, I promise you that I didn't tee him up with this subject. And you won't even know this, but what you've just touched on is really, really interesting to me. And how I like to think about it is basically this is an investment podcast, but you can invest with an investor lens in different types of capital. It doesn't
100%.
have to be financial capital. And you guys are going to go and explore that as well, which is freaking awesome. At the end of the day, this is not a Bitcoin podcast only. It's actually more like life. What do we do? How do we build societies? How do we be fit, healthy, happy? And so I split it into 3 buckets, which is financial capital, of course, so dollar return, Bitcoin return, but then humanistic, which is more like your wife, your kids, your family, your relationships, your network. You could call it social capital. And then the third being intellectual capital. What do you actually know? So could you invest in your skill set? Or like this podcast for me is also, I'm starting this business alone. I don't want to do it with anyone else because I have had some other experiences where I'm like, gosh, I got to that point and I tried too many different angles. It's like, no, you just have to take responsibility yourself and do it on your own.
Just
and if
self
it fails,
podcast.
Correct. If it fails, it's on me, and that's okay. So Nathan, so perhaps you could delve into, basically, I love that framing because Bitcoin at the end of the day is just money, and money is everywhere, and a massive part of every single thing we do in life, economic calculation, how we save, but it's also not the only thing in life.
100%.
So in some ways, what it does is it solves the wealth problem. It's like, oh, well, if that's now solved, what else can we do?
What else can we improve?
So what's happened in your life where you're now thinking about investing in these other areas, and why?
Well, for me, and I think a lot of us go through the kind of transformational changes that come along with it's the hope and optimism that results from actually having a sound money, which is a lot to kind of tease apart in the sense that,
what does that mean?
Right? I've talked about this sort of topic before, and I think it's pervasive within culture. And I know that it was pervasive within me as well, too, was this economic nihilism, right? The game's rigged. I can't get ahead. I know what the correct answer should be, thinking back to more the Libertarian, the Austrian economics frame. Okay, a gold standard or some sort of commodities or fixed value would be a better way of pursuing a communication layer for value, right? Money. But human incentives are that it will centralize, people will control it, they will abuse it, it can't win. And it really was this economic nihilism. And if you're starting from that foundational point of, I can't win, then why build? Why try, right? And that just permeates everything, right? It becomes very short term, becomes for the moment. It becomes really almost purposelessness, right? That it was part of my pursuing a longer time horizon in terms of family goals and things like this too, which lined up perfectly with Bitcoin. Bitcoin frees my time and energy to pursue higher orders, right? Bitcoin isn't the highest order, right? Bitcoin is the means of getting there. To take a silly analogy, right? Nobody buys a drill because they want a drill. They buy a drill because they want a hole in something. And Bitcoin is a tool in the same vein as well too. You don't want Bitcoin for itself. You want Bitcoin for everything else that it can provide you, whether it's long-term plannings and savings, right? Whether it's security, whether it's that uncensorability. It tees up other things, but we don't consume or have the Bitcoin for itself. And that's definitional for a money, right? It's the thing you trade for, not for itself, but for something else that will give you in the future. Getting into Bitcoin, freeing up your time, getting some clarity, getting plugged into these different kind of aligning networks as well too, you realize there is a opportunity in a vast amount of fields to improve both the quality of your life and those around you. Like, it just opens up the world, because all of a sudden you can go out there and you can be a top producer, right? You can just like tie into those warrior genes and those adventurer genes. If you could do anything, if you could try to build something great beyond yourself, what would it be? And we can go and pursue it, right? We can actually do it because we're not getting the rug pulled out from under us with fiat currency the entire time. We're getting a clearer vision of the world and then a clearer vision of our place in it. And so the idea really was that I learned so much more. Again, I came in beforehand with like the Austrian school, libertarian kind of political and economic views, but I was not knowledgeable on, even in my roles in like universities, with how corrupt the medical system is, right? Although we got some inklings of that a couple of years ago as well too, and the distortions in our food. And there's so many base assumptions that we have from being, unfortunately, like a fish in water, plugged into the fiat matrix for most of our lives, that there's a lot of unlearning and relearning and reevaluating out there, that the world as you know it was distorted by this fiat lens. Let's show you all the bright, wonderful spots and the truth that we now have through this Bitcoin lens. And so even just like wrapping it up and kind of tossing a bow on it, the idea was that I learned so much from Bitcoiners, not about Bitcoin, that I didn't want to build another Bitcoin podcast. I want to build a Bitcoiner podcast, if that in any way makes sense. Like, I want to share what I've learned about everything else that I've gotten along this crazy journey. As well as keep learning, right? That's the fun part too, is now I get to ask people that I love their work or I'm interested in what they're doing. I get to ask them to sit down and have a conversation with me, which is just wonderful.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more on that. It's great energy. It's like, oh, what could I podcast for a living? Like, is that
right?
Is that a thing?
Is that a thing that I could actually possibly do? Could this be like the wonderful side hustle or just the introduction? And and this is, I think, another, it kind of relates and plugs into Bitcoin as well too, is that if you're still trapped in the fiat matrix, if you still have this economic nihilism, you have no idea what you're actually capable of if you just get out there and try and fail. And that's another aspect, that those sort of things that I really want to encourage and bring to a large audience as well. I am walking into the dream job that I could have not possibly have imagined prior. And it really just came from, well, I'm going to try. Right? I'm just not going to be afraid to make calls, to get in there, to go for it. If I fail, that's fine. We'll move on to the next thing too. And with the learning and skills that I hope to gain for myself and part to others, I just want to encourage, because I really do think that we are the next kind of, we're going to be I think we're the ones cleaning up the mess after this fourth turning. And so let's everybody get ready. Let's learn a few new things. Let's build the better world.
Yeah, amen to that. And I'd like to hone back on something we just touched on before we click record, which is the process you're going through as you exit your fiat role to work in Bitcoin. And we were talking about the fear of failure. So I always like to give concrete examples as to like what we're actually talking about here. So just refer back to, if you're able to, the example you gave me earlier about your handover and this person just being like, I can't do this.
Well, that's exactly it. I have some beautiful and wonderful staff, and one that is very dear to me is so hesitant about assuming kind of part of my roles and responsibilities while leaving. And it's, in my opinion, it's all in their head, right? It's all in their head. The role that I had, the most important thing was just the willingness to make decisions and deal with the consequences of it and solve people problems. Because the unfortunate thing, and I think this comes also from the grind of like everybody having to work and you can barely get ahead and we're also exhausted and we're eating terrible food and we're sleeping like crap, that if you're willing to just be the person to make a call, just make a call and take it on, and you just try to solve everybody else's problems, people will naturally elevate you to a leadership position. And they were so apprehensive about this. And I see this a lot too, that, and I think reflecting on it, part of it really does come from our, in my opinion, terrible education system. That our education system does in no way teach leadership in trailblazers. It's quite the opposite. It's directly trying to create compliance, right? Everyone's looking to be told what to do. Everyone is looking to be told what to do. And the kind of dark secret is most people want to be told what to do. And so if you're comfortable assuming the risks, and I promise you, if you just try to do it, the risks are not nearly as bad as you think. It's always, you can always pivot or rebuild or make changes if need be. But if you're just willing to take it on and be the person to bear the responsibility and make the call, you'd be impressed just how far you can. People will naturally want to elevate you because they're looking to abdicate that responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And so the focus then of this content you and Gary are going to start to discuss is, like, you've mentioned the word leadership a few times. Like, what does leadership mean to you, Nathan?
Oh, what a fun one to unpack. Okay.
So, maybe, and could I frame it a little more?
Let's try and tee it up.
In some ways, and I think about this specifically when it comes to politics and how broken that is in relation to there being a money printer, and so the elected representatives of the communities that we live in are actually paid for in a kind of horrible oligopoly sense, and it's just so obviously corrupt.
Yeah.
And so 100%. Representative voting is not true. And basically the guys behind the scenes win every single time. And that makes you nihilistic in some ways. And Bitcoin is this incredible reversal on that. But it's to me, leadership is kind of like most important when the person doesn't really want to do it.
Yep.
They've just led by example.
Yep.
And so when I say, like, what does leadership mean to you? It's immediately, to me, it's not really leadership in some ways. They're just being themselves. It's like, no, you're the guy for the job. It's like, I don't want the job. Right? Lead us, please.
Yeah. I would make I'd say make the case that like a good kind of starting point is the idea that the leader is going to take the blame and give away the credit, right? The leader is the one that is going to try and organize. It's mostly a way of tapping into people's already their incentives and their values and trying to organize towards a goal. Now, when we look at things like the political system, and this is where you have the issues of things getting split apart. It's almost like splitting apart medium of exchange and store of value. It's going to create some problems. And in the political system, we've given all these people great power, but we've really removed accountability or responsibility. Again, it's almost like playing with somebody else's money. They get all the gains, but there's no risk associated with it too. That is the relationship. That tends to be the trade-off there, is that people are going to willingly abdicate some power or authority to you because it's in their best interest. And if you're successful in that role, then you will get the benefits as well too. But if you're not, you're also held responsible and you face the consequences of that. And it really is being the one, it's the nail willing to be like stood up, right? The one willing to stand up and raise your hand. It means good or bad, it's coming your way. And in terms of like my views on the subject, it really is organizational, it's motivational, it's leading up and down, right? It's showing how to be a good leader and be a good follower is part of it as well too. And like so many things in Bitcoin, good leaders are just providing value to the team. right? If you're in that leadership position, it's because you're providing value to everyone that you're leading, and it's getting us there better, smoother, more productive, right? And you are ultimately in a free market situation. You're only rewarded as a leader for the competency and your ability to perform, right? And you would be held account to that, right? The idea, like I remember like a bit of a weird tangent, but I think it kind of relates. I always get so frustrated with people when they talk about like how unfair it is that someone like Jeff Bezos has ungodly amounts of money. I'm sure there's some CIA funds and things going through there as well too. And that's fair. That's totally fair. But if we take that example, if there was no sort of government subsidies or tax advantages, or there's just free market system, and we have Amazon running, and the entire world is getting exactly what they need delivered to their door in 24 hours, right? Well, that's one, he's being compensated because he's providing an ungodly amount of value to everyone else, right? It is a reflection of his ability to scale value and help everyone. And then even going to like a true free market and sound money system, if he's retaining billions of dollars of value, that's amazing. Because not only did he provide that value voluntarily to people all across the globe, but then he didn't even consume anything on his own behalf. He literally gave the value, and if he has the money, it means he has not consumed any resources or services of his own. And so I very much so kind of view leadership in the same vein, as it's, if you're doing the right job and you're accountable to the people under you and you're giving value to them and helping grow them as well too, then it's the win-win all around, right? But if there has to be that negative repercussion for failure or poor leadership as well too. Otherwise, that sort of a system breaks down and there's nothing but resentment, and it feels like it's all just kind of insider favors. Is that, I know I went on some weird tangents. Does that kind of come across right?
Absolutely. I'll give you an example here of something that really upset me at the time, which was the absolute shit show that was the COVID lockdowns. And there was a politician in Victoria, where I lived at the time, Melbourne. Melbourne had some of the harshest lockdowns in the world. This guy called Daniel Andrews, and he had all these like COVID zero policies, and just the amount of different things that this guy was. He was the leader, right? He was the one calling the shots, and the stuff would go wrong clearly against what he was setting out to do, such as like, there'd be COVID cases coming out of a poorly managed, like they had these things called hotel quarantine, and they'd be taking international travelers and they'd be testing them and sitting them there. And they were paying massive contracts to security companies to come and put people there. And it turned out that it was one of his aides, uncles. There was no screening process on the company that was put in charge. And then there was all these stories of these guys that were completely inexperienced in how to deal with any kind of disease transmission, blah, blah, blah. This guy ends up in a government-funded court case for this, supposed like cock up.
Yep.
Putting aside what COVID even is, right? But
yeah. This
guy was able to get up in this system and go, I can't remember who sent the email to the company that hired them. It's like, okay, so there's been this inside job. So, okay, you can't remember. Well, let's get in your chief of staff. Let's get in your head of health. And all these people just stood up and said, I swear by the Bible to tell the truth, nothing but the truth. And they all go, I just cannot recall. I cannot recall. Yeah. And it was like, this can't be serious. Like, this is an absolute fucking joke. And putting aside the effectiveness of the policies, the need of the policies in the first place, all the drama on the media, it's like you said you were going to do something, you didn't do it, and now you can't remember if you did it or not.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops. And they walk off. And I think one lady resigned. He kept his job, and he's now in some cushy, government-funded,
golden parachute
package
somewhere. Yeah.
And the idea of accountability.
Yep.
It's just nowhere. Like, it's making the hairs on the back of my neck, Scott. It's just like, fuck you, mate. That's a ridiculous way to behave and think it's okay. And, well, at least that's my view. So again, it's politics, which is perhaps not the point here, but the leadership was completely unaccountable. And that frustrates the hell out of me. And I think, to your point, leadership is about accountability. That that feedback loop has to be there. And so my question to you, Nathan, is more actually, as an investor, can you invest in leadership? It seems to me to be a very obvious intellectual capital that is very, very worth investing into.
No, 100%. And I think that, like, and this, I'd love to get your perspective on this, because one of the worst things about the distortions from the fiat printer and all the government subsidies and this crap too is that it makes evaluating companies on whether or not you want to invest in that, if that actually is like an investable company, it completely skews it, right? Because it could be a terrible company, but they're getting tons of subsidies and just running up their marketing budget, their stock would still rise, right? It goes back to, if there's distortions in the money, you're getting bad signals, and it's really, really hard to maneuver around those, right? Things that should be, the consequences are removed. So if you can't plan like A leads to B leads to C, you can't project out how somebody might perform or how they would do. But I would argue that in terms of on an investor level, especially if you're looking at something maybe smaller scale locally, right? Something that you maybe have more of an equity stake in, that's not like a giant publicly traded company, the leadership team is basically everything. If you can get the right people on the bus, that means way more than necessarily where the bus is going, because the best people there will be able to pivot and adapt and deal with the responses that they're getting back from the market and from their customers. And the other one too is that you can see these companies completely collapse and not realizing how pivotal some people in the organization were. It goes back to that Pareto distribution kind of idea, right? Almost like the 80-20 rule that, for any given organization, the root of the total population is going to be producing half the output. And I mean, there's one of my favorite books. I love this book, and he's got a few in the series too. There's a book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink.
Yeah, I read that recently. It's good.
Great book. His other ones are fantastic too, right? Highly recommend. I've gone over it several times, and anytime I had someone that we promoted into the next level, it was one of the ones that I got them to read. And it wasn't so they necessarily had to agree with my framework on leadership or why it's important or how to go about it, but more than anything, I wanted to give them some ideas, get them to start thinking about it, and kind of understand where I'm coming from too. And they have the example in the book of, I think it's the Navy SEALs training, and they're basically doing these kind of like races, right? The teams are racing, got to get the raft out in the water, go around and kind of come back. And they had the one team constantly in first, and they had the team in last. And what they did is they just swapped the leaders, the kind of crew leads from those two teams, from the last place in the first team, and the last team made it up to the front, right? And that there is so much power in a good leader to understand, to motivate, to communicate, to organize people, that there's almost nothing more important at that, right? If you don't, and it becomes a little bit obvious with the reverse. If you have a bad leader at the helm, the company's screwed, because nobody's going to buy into the mission. They're going to get apathetic. They may even get resentful at times as well too. That a good leader, I think it's critical to success, and I think it is an indication of success for any organization, whether or not be a company. But even if it's not, sufficient for success, I can very confidently say that a bad leader will destroy a company.
And so from a non-financial return, like when I read a book like Extreme Ownership, it had a really big impact on me.
Yeah.
And it's not many books that I read and then I actually change my habits.
Yep.
And I had the phrase extreme ownership on my phone, and I found myself in, as you know, when you're in a relationship and you've got kids, with my wife, like absolutely love her dearly, but there are times when you butt heads, right? Like,
of course.
And I found that extreme ownership was an extraordinarily powerful way of dealing with it. Because I go, it's my fault. It's my fault. It's completely my fault. And I'll deal with it this way, this way, this way.
Yep.
And boom, the energy shifts like straight away. Now, it's fun because I didn't have to be in Iraq getting shot at to figure
learn
that
these
out.
lessons, right? That's the beauty of books.
And so this is why it's such a classic intellectual capital investment, because it's not actually about money, but it's also like, how much richer can you make your life? And that's really, really, really powerful. And you're totally correct. I mean, the investment lens you put on it, the first point is like, it's super simple, right? When the stock market is measured in dollars and no one's actually calculating how the purchasing power is changing in dollars, then it may look like the stock market's going up in value, but actually the purchasing power hasn't changed.
Right.
And so most people think they're getting rich when actually their dollars can't buy anymore. So that's the most classic
100%.
inflation
Classic
problem.
Example, Vancouver real estate priced in gold, I think peaked in 2017. It's just flat.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. And another one I always love is that it costs the same amount today in gold to buy a Savile Row suit as it did for a Roman to kit themselves out back in 200 AD. So it's just, what metric are you looking at to measure the world? And equally, like, how do you measure, and this is a good question then. So how do you measure leadership? Is there a metric for that? Because,
It's funny. Let me try and pull it apart and I'll see if there's anything I can come up with. Because my first instinct actually reminded me, and I know that we're both parents, right? So this one will kind of hit home too, is like, my brain pivoted to like, how do you measure being a good father? I don't know why, but that's like, and again, it's very related to leadership. So that's where the brain first went. And the immediate answer was like, well, that depends on, that's the review of my kids and my wife, right? If I'm, and it's really like, just speaking of relationships, it's so powerful even just to stop and check in with everybody, because we don't do this. Our lives are so hectic and so busy, and just like turn to the wife, turn to the kids. Yeah. How are you happy with how am I doing as dad? How am I doing as husband? Right. You might be amazed to get some feedback, be like, oh, I really appreciated this, but I feel like we haven't really hung out in a while. It's like, that's something important, right? People will tell you the most interesting and profound things if you just stop and ask them for a second. And so if I was going to measure leadership, it would really be on the success towards whatever strategic goal everyone's aligned upon, and also the morale and welfare of the team. Those would be the ones like very, very hard to quantify, but morale's very, very easy.
Happiness.
Right? It's because I wouldn't even say happiness, because we could be like, to take a silly extreme example, we could be miserable in the trenches together, but as long as we still feel like we can win, or we're going to get there, or we're going to get to that goal, you can bear any how with a strong enough why. Right. And so long, like even communicating the why to the team doesn't necessarily have to be happy, particularly in the short term, to be on board, fulfilled, and hungry, and still going after it. Right. Even just thinking of like just how much endurance athletes put out when they're in the middle of a game. You could be a great leader and your team could be down, and you guys could be angry and be frustrated and still be a great leader to maybe come back and like get that game-winning goal and make it happen. So it's something, I'm just touching on it. It's something deeper than happiness, because happiness would be just almost, and there's also giving them what they want in the moment, which doesn't go towards the end. Let's say you and I, Jake, we spin up our own little widget company here, right? We got this massive order and we got to stay up till like 3 a.m, 4 nights in a row in order to get this out. We're not going to be happy when we're doing that. But still, as a leader, it would still be great leadership, and we might be very happy on the return on the other side. And so in terms of success as a leader, it would be that you are sufficiently moving, you are moving the team towards the shared common goals and paying attention to what's important to them and their current state of where we are on the trajectory. Really subjective, but that's about where my mind immediately comes to.
But this is the point: is it's qualitative, not quantitative.
Yes, and I think it's recognizable as well too. Like if I were to look at somebody and be like, "Oh man, you are not living up to your potential." What does that even mean? But we all intuitively be like, "I get that," right? I've had people say that to me when I was a younger man too. It's like, you're really not living up to your potential. And I just intuitively, right? I intuitively go like, shit, he's right. But it's not like we measure out like, well, your income should be here at this point. And really you're spending this many, like it's in no way quantitative. But we do as humans have a very innate ability. And I think it comes from just even social interactions, being able to read people of qualitative evaluations. And I think that even if it's fun to tease it apart, and then there's things that you can learn. When you see a good leader, when you're in a situation with a good leader, and when you're in a situation with a bad one, as well too.
And so to take this family example, it's actually a really good way of looking through it. And talking of books, I'm reading a book called Family Wealth.
Nice.
And something like How to Keep It in the Family. And I'm going to get my friend Jason Parks on the podcast soon. He's going to be the person to talk about it in more detail, because he introduced it to me as the first place he heard of the concept of humanistic, intellectual, and financial wealth. And basically this guy argues that for a family to retain wealth for longer than 100 years, it's most important to invest into your humanistic capital and your intellectual capital. If you do that, the financial returns take care of themselves. And he's talking on a pretty like simple base. Like you need to have lots of kids, right?
Oh yeah.
Like if you don't have any children, then you cannot continue to store wealth over time. And then he talks about how you can have trusts, and really what you want to do is get every family member to write a resume every year with all of their latest skills, focuses, passions. And you can start to look at, okay, well, this is our human capital. This is what everyone loves doing. This is what, you can steer your philanthropic efforts towards, perhaps, or you could, you know what I mean? And then they're talking about how you have a grandfather or grandmother relationship with a grandchild, and they run the philanthropy. And so a 6-year-old can come to them and say, this is something I really want to give some money towards. Okay, why?
Why?
And you teach them to, explain themselves and rationalize. And then, once they get to 10, 12 years old, it needs to be far more like written document to like actually propose something. And they were all really fascinating ideas that they touch on things that I've been taught via my family consciously and subconsciously. But I think this is the kind of area that the Bitcoiners are able to move into. It's you're higher up the Maslow hierarchy of needs now where, okay, well, I don't need to go and do 12-hour days for someone to get paid in dollars that are disintegrating into the floor. I've actually got a purchasing power I can rely on for the foreseeable future. What do I actually want to do? And so to bring it to that family point, it's like, okay, one thing I've thought about before I read this family wealth book is, what does the ideal 25-year-old look like?
Ooh, that's a good question.
And so I'll put that to you, Nathan. What would the ideal 25-year-old look like as parents? Like we're young dads at the moment, so I know you're about to have your third. I think number 3 hasn't turned up yet, right?
It's like any minute now. Its due date is like a month and change out, but I suspect we're going to sneak out early.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And I recently had the third a few months ago, so we've got 25 years to figure this out.
That's
time. That's the strategic goal, right? It's like, okay, what does the ideal 25-year-old look like? And is that something we can kind of measure?
Okay, let me try and parse this apart, because originally where I thought you were going, which I think is definitely related to this as well too, is that particularly as Bitcoiners and then as Bitcoin wealth continues to accrue purchasing power and grow too, how do you avoid that like shirt sleeves to suits to shirt sleeves kind of setup, right?
Well, that's essentially what I'm looking at. Yeah.
Right. How do we leave them not wanting, but not take away the motivation that made maybe us so hungry in the beginning to begin with? Need and wanting are powerful drivers. So what do we do with it and how do we target it? I think first and foremost, the way we get our kids, or at least I'll speak for myself, and maybe I'll tell you too, and you can take these ideas or tell me to shove it, is one, we have to start reevaluating the entire childhood process now, right? If we do not take the reins of it when they're young, we're going to struggle to produce adults of real meaning and drive in the future. And so for me, this looks at like homeschooling, diet, getting away from the existing system, and making sure not to squash what's already there. One of the things that I'm very attentive of, which I'm sure you can relate to, is really hard, is that I do not want to instill compliance in my kids, but they're also trying to stick stuff in the outlets. So this is like a fun balance along the way, because I don't want to crush.
Don't fucking do that. Oh,
right? It's like, yeah. Stop hitting your sister with an apple. Like, it's the worst part is, and just side note, when they do something that's like, I don't want to encourage this behavior, but it was really funny. Like, it's like, don't laugh. Nope, not laughing.
Yeah, you have to like
serious. Yeah, dad's going to leave the room for a second and come back in. But and it goes back to like leading and almost shepherding in the sense that our role is to identify where their skills and natural talents already lie and where their interests are too, right? One of the most beautiful things you can say to somebody is not, I love you, but tell me more, right? And so setting them up to be able to financially capitalize on the natural inclinations that they already have them find their place, which isn't like shoving a wheel in, like a cog into a spot. It's more of like tapping into what they're already interested on and using that pull rather than push towards something like, okay, you really like this. How could we maybe monetize that? Or what roles or companies could we build around it, right? To build upon what they are. The goal is to deliver them with sound mind and sound body into adulthood, right? And I think it's for the male brain in particular. You don't fully mature until around 25. So that would be that point. And so for me, success at that point means that they're long-term goal oriented. They're critical thinkers. They are self-pursuing knowledge. Whether or not I enjoy the field myself or not doesn't particularly matter. The pursuit of knowledge is grand enough that if they find a niche that they really want to go into, there will be opportunities. There are opportunities we don't necessarily see. So it would be a continual pursuit of education, betterment, long-term thinking. And I'll be honest, not everyone's going to share this opinion. I want them to be family oriented as well too, because I think that really helped ground me. And I think it's really important in that long-term, that legacy building. And like you were talking, if we're going to build a family dynasty, then son, I love you. I promise I'm going to be here to help. I would love to retire and I'll help you take care of your kids, but we're going to make them a good partner, right? Because that doesn't just pertain to business and employment and hobbies and activities, but like, I want to make sure that my son will be a great husband. I want to make sure that he's going to be not only a good leader, but which means a good husband and a good father and everything that kind of lines up from that. And also, I have a lot of mistakes. we talked about like learning, like you didn't have to go to Iraq in order to learn the lessons from Jocko Willink that apply to both business and family and life as well too. I am not going to hide the mistakes that I made for my kids. I'm going to expressly point them out and try to guide them in the sense that I'm not going to try to be perfect. I'm going to apologize when I make mistakes, apologize for the mistakes that I have made and show how we can do better and keep trying to iterate better, right? I'm not taking a shot at my dad to say that I want to be a better father than he was, right? That's not me saying that he was a bad father. It's saying that like we all have room for improvement, right? And let's keep going. Just like I hope that he was a better father than his and his before. And so in getting them to 25, I want to make sure that I leave them with the skills and habits and body and mind so that they can go out there and face the world on their own without me and win in family, win in career, win in relationships, that they can pursue what drives them and achieve it. And I do think that really comes down to, again, good habits, whether it's nutrition, education, exercise, the works, and also instilling that confidence that they can do it. Because even jumping back to our earlier conversation about like leadership and how most people don't want to lead, I'm going to build leaders. That's my goal. I'm going to build leaders that they will lead up and down, right? They will be, and being a good leader can mean being a good follower when you're in the presence of somebody who you respect their authority on the subject as well too, right? It doesn't mean always being the one in charge. It can mean recognizing like, okay, I'm learning about podcasting from Jake right now. I'm going to step back. I'm going to watch this process. I'm going to gather something from that as well too. But it's giving them enough of a safety net that and making sure that they know no matter what happens, I've always got your back. Go out there and fail, right? Go out there, try, fail, try again. And if I can get them to that point where they can't be easily persuaded or manipulated, where they're thinking long-term, they're taking care of themselves and the people around them, I think they'll do absolutely phenomenal.
And I love the fact that you've actually mentioned the word fail.
Yeah.
Because in order to win, you have to fail.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's basically as counterintuitive as it gets.
Right.
But the scenario you touched on at the very start about your colleague who like they're totally capable of doing it, but they're scared of failing.
That's exactly it. They're scared of doing a bad job or failing.
It's almost like as an adult or as a dad, my job is to basically create such a good soft landing for every failure that as a 25-year-old, they're like not fearless in that being totally fearless might not be that helpful sometimes because you actually would throw yourself off the top of a building as a young man. It's like,
have
hey guys,
balance here.
I'm just going to try jumping out here, see what happens. But it's that ability to roll the dice, and that's very, very powerful.
And sorry, I just get so excited about this topic too.
No, do keep going.
I love parenting. I think a 10 out of 10, everyone go have kids. It's the best thing. I absolutely love it. And you get to relive a bunch of fun stuff along the way too. But on that note, you're right. Cause it's not, you're forever expanding the boundaries at which they can play in an experiment, so that they're growing their competency, right? Because that skill set, that's where you gain skills and that's where you improve. You have to fail. You have to go right to the edge of your ability and then try to push past it in order to actually improve and iterate further down. And so even now, right, like our roles as dad is almost like adjusting the bumpers on bowling or just like the guardrails and shifting them out. I let my kids get hurt all the time. And it's purposeful, right? It's in a controlled environment and it's kind of a risk assessment. They've got their cushions and I love jumping off stuff. And sometimes they bash heads or they hit the edge of the couch or they're running around, they catch the table. The goal is that they never get hurt. The goal is that they never hurt so devastatedly hurt that they can't continue playing or get back in there. But you gotta let them try. And I know for like my wife, it was so, and you'll probably relate to this too. It was so much harder with the first one. And then with number 2, it was way easy. Like you're like, oh no, just let him have at it. Yep. He's going to jump off that. And
fine.
They're fine. He had 9 jumps were good. And on the 10th one, he kind of biffed it into hurt. We're going to dust you off and we're going to keep going and keep trying because it is at the edges of your ability where you learn to expand and grow and improve, but you have to get there and you're going to go over by too much at times. And
again, Nathan, to take an investor lens, like how do we invest in being better parents?
One, the most important thing, and it's kind of what we're doing right now, is you acknowledge that you can be and that it's important and you start trying. It's almost like the AA thing. Like first we have to do is admit we have a problem, right? Talk about parenting. Right. Hi, I'm Nathan. I'm a parent. talking with friends and family. It's not trying to be perfect, right? Have that social group that you can bounce ideas off of. And honestly, pick up books, man. Listen to podcasts, listen to videos, pick up books, study the subject. You might not agree with everything. You might pull a couple of nuggets of wisdom out of there along the way. But even like you take driver's ed before you get behind a car, right? I'm Bitcoin mentor, right? What we do is education. People will come to us, or we can point them in the right array of resources before they start moving around money and moving around Bitcoin. Educating the next generation is higher, right? It's if you can take it. I've heard Ben say this a million times. If you can take care of a kid, you can learn Bitcoin. You'll be fine. Yes. But to that same vein, think about all the time that you spent investing in learning about your business, learning about your career, learning about Bitcoin, learning about finance. If you're not already, allocate 10% to parenting as well too. Because in particularly if you're in our situation here, the formative years are so important. If you take shortcuts, or you have bad habits, or you don't really invest the time now when they're young, you will pay for it later when they're teenagers and they don't give a shit about your opinion, right? You need to build the bond and the relationship and the good habits now, so that when the influence of their peer group becomes so much more important and so much more powerful, they still care what you think, that you still fulfill a role. They still are open with you. They still want to talk to you. They're still looking for your guidance. But if you, and I hate to be so harsh on it, but fuck it, they're my opinions. I'll share them. If you're just constantly dumping your kids with someone else and you're not spending any time with them and you're not investing in trying to be a better parent or looking for ways to improve or even just try to stay up to date, right? Things are changing. We can always look to iterate and improve things. It'll be easy. It's again, short time preference versus long time preference. It'll be easier now and you will pay for it later because you didn't invest in strengthening that foundation, that bond to build off of, right? It's so critical and you'll get that time back. Again, you pay for it now, pay for it later. There's no way around it.
Awesome. And I love this subject. It's really cool to connect with you on this because we're all just figuring it out.
Oh yeah.
And I try my best not to judge other parents for making decisions that I wouldn't make. It's so really hard not to.
Yeah, it's so hard.
But I try my best not to, because all you can control is your environment. I'd love to know. So just one book. I'll go, Nathan.
I'll go quick. Hold the book. Because even on that note, going back to leadership and things as well too, talking about the kids, I see people making decisions, and my immediate response is that, okay, if the kid and your wife and you all get a vote, which way did they vote on what you're currently doing? Because so often or not, I see that's a detriment to them. That's only for you. And that's not being a good leader, right? That doesn't mean you completely sacrifice yourself. I mean, you do in the early years a little bit. Like, you're not going to have a personal life when you have a newborn. It's part of the game. It's the journey. It's fine.
Yeah.
But it's not about completely obfuscating your opinion as well too, but making sure the kid who's not fully formed yet has a vote at what would be best for them in the longevity. And again, it's that short time frame. It's poor leadership. I see people making decisions that are clearly not in the best interest of the kid. If the kid got a vote, it's not what they would want. I'm sorry. I just had to get it out. I'm really passionate about parenting.
And it's so interesting. It's like, what do they want? It's like, to some degree, no, you can't eat, lollies all day.
Yeah.
So no.
Yeah.
But it's like, I'd like to go to the beach today rather than going to, the playground. You're like, cool. Yeah. Okay, let's do that.
All right.
So Nathan, a couple of things come up to me I want to mention. First of all, just in terms of a book, the most impactful homeschooling book that I've read is called Free to Learn by a guy called Peter Gray. Have you read that?
No, but I heard somebody else. It was another Bitcoiner I had in conversation. I believe brought it up in conversation. And I think I may have seen some podcasts or something with him. It's very familiar.
It's excellent. And I'll let you go and read that, and then we can talk about it. And the other is just a situation here in Australia that's very typical that I see all the time. And I'll caveat this with, I homeschool our kids. Nice. Homeschooling is whatever you want it to mean. We're basically just the primary caregiver as much as possible.
100%.
So from my wife and I's research, very clear, like the first 7 years of a child's life are the most formative.
Yep.
And so the more that you can be actively involved in that period, the better.
Right.
If I hadn't been able to buy Bitcoin in the way that I have, I wouldn't be able to be in my kid's life all day, every day. And so I have to thank Bitcoin for that. And it is a complete alteration to how I was parented.
Yeah.
And particularly as an 8-year-old, I was sent off to a boarding school for 10 years. So,
oh, shit. Went to the other extreme.
Other extreme, right? And it was for my own good. And my parents thought it was the right choice. Yeah. But like, this is just going to be different set up, like being at home a lot more as the dad, primary caregiver around all the time. And I'm so proud of that. it's really fucking awesome as an experience. It's very hard sometimes, but there's a situation here in Australia that does my head in, because people always have a choice, but they'll tell you that they don't.
Yeah.
And so there's an infant vaccine schedule here, which is arduous, is probably a kind word to give it. But
Yep.
if you don't do every single thing that they ask you to do, then you fall off the, if you don't follow their guidelines, you don't get access to the publicly funded daycare system. And so there are people that will say, I had to vaccinate my child with all of the vaccines because I had to get childcare. And so it may be the case that they think that, but like, is that really true?
Well,
and
even just take it right back to extreme ownership, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to your point about like extreme ownership is one, but also it's a short-term gain.
Mm-hmm.
What are the health disbenefits of taking all of these things? Can you answer that? And the government, they've got my back, haven't they? Haven't they?
Haven't they?
Like, who's making all the money? What is the incentive involved? And it's just scary as fuck when you start digging into it. But, you know, clearly things like taking vaccinations with high levels of heavy metals in them and the autism rates going through the roof and all this kind of stuff. You just think it's wild, right? But people are choosing to do it.
Yep.
And they frame it as like, I have to do this because X, Y, Z. And I struggle with that. So yes, I don't know if there's anything to comment on it per se.
There is
like,
so
we
much
all
to
have
pack
a choice.
Because we keep dancing around the same subjects, voting in different, but kind of blasting off into different topics. And what it is it comes down to like extreme ownership is locus of control. Am I in control or is somebody else in control? Right. And that in terms of like one of the greatest indicators for like success and your outlook on life is whether or not you think that you are in control of your environment and you are in control of your situation, or if things are happening to you, right? People who feel that things are happening to them, it's very demoralizing. It's very like, it makes you feel small. It's very disempowering would be a good word for it as well there too. That when you go through something like extreme ownership, saying, okay, whatever happens, it's my fault, it's my responsibility. What you're also saying is that whatever happens, I'm in control, right? And that's empowering. And that's something that we definitely want to communicate to other Bitcoiners. I think that Bitcoiners are naturally already picking up on. I immediately picked up on when you were telling that as well too, is people say that they had to, right? Or say that they had no choice when really it was they wouldn't. You know, you wouldn't take the cost, right? And you don't do yourself any favors by saying that you didn't have a choice. That's going to put you in a weaker mindset, a negative mindset, and make you feel smaller in your capacity. And you kind of start to live that out as well too. So even if
it's like it perforates through all decision making.
Yes, absolutely. It will, because it's almost like, I'll give you a silly example, but hopefully it'll make sense. So I'm a strong believer and a firm advocate in peaceful parenting, never hit children under any circumstances whatsoever. They are not of sound mind. As we were just talking earlier, you don't like fully develop or mature until 25, right? If my wife was disagreeing with me and I started hitting her in public, people would think that was barbaric, and it is, right? These are the most innocent things, and you are unbelievably, you are the giant
long night, babe.
gorilla.
Sorry.
Yeah. I said I wanted tartar sauce. No. And people will do things, they'll make excuses for hitting their kids, right? He wasn't listening. He was going to get hurt. But the thing is, as soon as you allow that once, then now that's an option on the table, right? Instead of forcing yourself to go, I can't do this, I have to come up with another way. It gives you an out, and it's almost like the path of least resistance. You will take it again. As soon as you justify it once, you will take it again. So if you're in a position where you say like, I had no choice, had to do it, right? You've now set yourself up to be the person that goes, I had no choice, I have to do it. And you will repeat that behavior in other situations as well too, right? It's even different if you said that like, it was a terrible situation and I tried to do my best and weigh the consequences, and I decided that like, look, I'm in a bad spot, but I've got to do this way. But even if you acknowledge that you made a lesser of two evils choice, you still didn't take away your own autonomy in that situation. It could be very, and it also might inspire you to make changes to not be in that situation again. But as soon as you say that you had no control and you couldn't do anything, you kind of write it off and you allow yourself to do that again in the future. If you say that you did have control, but you chose what you thought were the lesser of two evils, at least you took ownership for it. So now you might change something else about your situation, your world, everything that's going on, so that doesn't get put on you again. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's making me feel guilty because the other day I slapped my 4-year-old on the bum. And
yeah.
it was
Stop
bedtime.
that.
Yeah, right. And ownership.
Yeah.
I'm going to own up to it. So I did it. And you're right. It was, she like started hitting and kicking me. And I got so triggered by it. I was like, don't do that.
Yep.
And just hit her on the bum.
And you were spanked too as a kid, weren't you?
I was. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So
and it's history repeating itself.
Back,
and it's like, okay, what? I just, as you were saying, I was like, I've got to tell him this because it's the fact that you did it once that it then becomes part of the toolkit for the future.
Right.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Because in a weird way, I then went downstairs and told my wife and explained away the action. It's like, no, mate, you shouldn't fucking do that.
Yep.
You know, obviously I apologized and everything
100%.
like that, but it's actually now it's about course correcting. And this is
Correct.
the moment from now onwards, I will hold that philosophy. So thank you so much for sharing that. And,
you're very welcome.
Oh, God,
that actually makes
hard.
me feel really good. No, but nobody talks about this, right? It can be really embarrassing or a very sensitive subject. Because the other thing too is that if I bring up these sort of things with other parents and they have spanked, and I make a argument of like, look, you wouldn't hit somebody who was mentally handicapped. They're basically mentally handicapped, right?
Yes, they're just underdeveloped brains. Yeah,
exactly, right. Then they feel really bad, right? And that doesn't, and it becomes like you bump up against the ego and the identity, and people get really defensive, and it's really hard to do. But again, going back to like our perspective on things, it's like, look, we're here to improve upon the lessons that we have as a kid. And it doesn't mean that you can't apologize for what you did and did better and build a better world. And it can stop with you too, right? We're all still learning. I have gotten upset and yelled at my kids, and I've had to turn back and apologize. And that was really important, was not having such an ego to like justify it after the fact, to go in and go, Dad got mad. It wasn't your fault. I shouldn't have yelled. That's against the rules. The rules are the same for everybody, right? In my household, you don't take, you don't yell, and you don't hit. That's basically it. It's just libertarian rules. No yelling, no hitting, no taking. Those are dads as well too, but it's not easy in those moments, right? Because you're going to have that moments where like one sibling hurts another, or the situation's getting out of hand and you might have to like physically intervene without hitting or hurting. We don't do timeouts, right? Because I don't want to do, because that for me is confinement. So I don't do timeouts, but it's almost like, do you ever have dogs?
Yeah.
Okay. So like when a puppy bites you, a great way to deal with that is to make a loud noise and leave, right? You're basically yipping and saying, nope, that hurt. I don't want to play with you. And you leave, right? And again, wife and I are constantly talking about how we can improve things and adjust and what was the best thing. But like one thing we'll do is like, I'll never do a timeout, but I'll leave you, right? If you're behaving in a way that's not conducive with how we act, it's not okay for the, age appropriate and these things too. Dad doesn't want to play. You don't have to go somewhere, but Dad's not going to play with you anymore. I'm going to go somewhere else. And even if you follow me, it'd be like, no, I told you that wasn't okay. I don't want to play with you anymore. It's the same thing you kind of do with a dog, right? But it's, if you allow for these things that are kind of, because again, I would argue that like spanking is absolutely a violation of the non-aggression principle. As soon as you allow it a little bit to
interesting
creep in,
lens actually to use, yeah, okay,
right? Then you stop looking for other ways to mitigate it, right? I'll give you one that was like, it's still a struggle to this day too, is that no taking, right? So no taking. And the way that we've had to navigate this is it's very expressly clear on like, what is the kids have their own personal things, and those are theirs. And even Dad can't take them. But like a lot of the toys in the house, those are mom's. Those are mom's, and mom lets you use them, right? Because I want to make sure that we're conveying, and they're for everyone to share, and mom sets the rules on it. So that we're starting to build those lessons of kind of who owns what is property rights, what is your property. But at the end of the day, for the things that are identified as like, yeah, that's yours, that's 100% yours, even I can't take it. Because it has to be the same rules for everybody.
It's actually kind of cool because it gets me thinking. We end up in hot water all the time. So obviously, the older the child is, the faster, the stronger, the quicker they are to the sibling that's younger than them. So it's I got it first. Yep. Is a rule that gets used a lot that seems to have organically appeared.
Because they'll look for the ways to navigate around the rules, right? So you got to make sure the rules are clearly defined. It's making me think about
how I might do that differently because. And it's like, look, here's some libertarian thought. that's not going to fly. But it's like, no, that's actually yours and no one else can use it. Okay, well, that makes more sense. Nathan, well, listen, an hour has flown by chatting with you. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
I didn't even realize it was already an hour, dude.
Yeah.
My God, we're going to do this again.
Do you have another couple minutes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm in no mean
rush.
Okay,
I have one last question for you, which intrigued on a personal level. So, are you guys homeschooling your kids, and how have you navigated that?
It's been hard, and it's trying to use Bitcoin and savings to actually get to that point. But the nice thing is, and again, if you go back and just lay all the cards on the table, having 3 kids makes daycare and schooling kind of like unbearable, right? Particularly like if I look at the daycare sort of things, in the sense that economically speaking, it's like, okay, so you're maybe working for a couple cents per hour after everything's paid off of. So an honest assessment of that. And then realistically, like I'm very fortunate where we are. And again, I highly recommend it. The data on it looks great. And again, your kids, the thing they want most in this world is to spend time with you. And that's how value transmission really comes across. I don't know about you, Jake, but in terms of most of my education, it came from self-learning and experience. Very little came from high school and uni.
Yes.
Like I walked away with very little. The best lessons were self-pursued and learning from mentors and peers and things as well too. And so for us, again, it's the idea that we're doing homeschooling because it will have the biggest return on both relationships and family and hopefully their careers and success in the future as well too. It's making sure that the value transmission is there, because at a best case scenario, a public school just won't transmit any values. And nowadays they're transmitting values that I am antithetical to, that are against my personal beliefs and that I want for my family as well, which makes perfect sense. If you're taking money from people by force, by threat of a gun, in order to pay someone's salary, they're going to find a whole bunch of ways to justify why that system is the best system, right? So it's important, again, even going back to leadership, that we live out the values that we have, and the homeschooling is part of that as well too. But in terms of this whole conversation is so beautifully full circle. So how do I think about homeschooling and how are we going to pursue it? We're going to fail. That's exactly what we're going to do. We know it's the best outcome. We know it's what values align and what we want to teach.
Fail every day, mate. Yeah.
So we're just going to try and we're going to fail. And what works will adjust. And there's a wonderful homeschooling community around us. And so kids are resilient, man. Even if like if they get to 18 and they have good social skills and communications, but we missed out on a whole bunch of like information, they can pick that up. There's no way that they can't, right? It's most important that, again, sound mind, sound body, and kind of those good relationships to get there. So I'm not afraid to fail at it. I'm sure we'll pick up tricks along the way. We'll talk to other people who have done it. We'll network with the community around us. I mean, the whole public schooling institution is maybe like 100 years old. We're going back to where we came from. How did you learn? You went out with your dad in the field and you learned stuff.
You figured it out. Yeah.
You figured it out and you tried. Yeah. And I am so much more of an experiential learner.
No, it wasn't child labor. It was reality.
Yes. It was all about preparing them to take that role in your place so that you can That's the other thing about the leaders. Quick bitch for a second as well too. The fact that we have nothing but geriatric people at the top of these hierarchies as well too. Like, I'm sorry, this will be cover the ears, kids. Get the fuck out of the way and let the next generation lead, right? It is time for you to fulfill the grandfather role, which is wise guide, but empower the next generation to lead. We should not have 80-year-olds in these positions of power. We barely let them thrive in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it?
Right? But they have they're not held to account, and they don't want to give up power.
No, and it's their system. And that's okay. There's another way of building another system here, which is, I think, what this is all about essentially. It's an open invitation. Like Bitcoin is an opt-in, opt-out system. If you choose not to get involved, that's up to you. But I personally get so much by listening to podcasts because I'm like, they're actually living that reality. And exactly everything we've talked about today, we're actually doing. And that's why I think it's powerful, because people can get inspiration from it, learn from it, and make decisions. And I think that's the whole point. Well, Nathan, on that note, unless you have anything final to add, I'd like to just wrap us up. So any closing thoughts? I'll hand it over to you.
My only closing thought, which is related to this whole conversation, is that if you just listen to your conscience and your intuition and try to live your values without fear of failure, you'll be fine. You'll do great. You'll probably do amazing things.
Awesome. Fuck yeah, that's a great vibe. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Jake. It's been great talking.